Hello friends and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be all about classics. I have 40 unread classics on my shelf at the moment and I wanted to share with you all the books I was planning to read for the Classics Community 2020 challenge. I do have some unread classics back home in Pakistan, but I'm not going to include them in this video. I'm just going to talk about all the classics I do have which I want to read this year. First, I want to talk about all the unread Russian classics on my shelf. So the first one is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, this is a 1000-page book, but I'm very excited to read this one. I am currently reading a book by the same author, which is The Gambler. But for the sake of this video, I'm not going to include this book because it is on my currently reading pile, not on my TBR shelf. I'm on page 55 and I'm really enjoying the book. The next Russian classic on my TBR is Stories for Our Time by Anton Chekhov. This is a collection of short stories by Chekhov. The next book on my shelf is Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. This is in the Russian Vintage Classics edition and I love these editions and I'm super excited to read this book. The last Russian classic on my shelf is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Moving on from the Russian classics to the French classics, I have 4 books by French authors which I want to read. The first one is The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This is in the Penguin Popular Classics edition. Another French classic is Candide or Optimism by Voltaire. This is in the Penguin Black Spine edition. The third French classic on my shelf is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. This edition is by Penguin Books India. And the last French classic is Bel-Ami by Guy de Maupassant. This is in the Oxford World's Classics edition. I just found out that there is a movie based off this book starring Robert Pattinson, so I'm super excited to watch the movie, obviously after reading the book. Moving on to some British authors, I have 5 books by Anthony Trollope on my shelf which I want to read. The first one is The Eustace Diamonds by Anthony Trollope, Orley Farm by Anthony Trollope. Both of these are in the Oxford World's Classics edition. Then I have 3 books from the Barsetshire Chronicles. The first one is The Warden by Anthony Trollope, Dr. Thorne by Anthony Trollope, and The Small House at Allington by Anthony Trollope. There are a total of 6 books in the Barsetshire Chronicles series, but I'm going to buy them as I start the series. I need to start reading the first book first. I have 2 books by Charles Dickens which I have to read. The first one is Martin Chuzzlewit by Charles Dickens in the Penguin Popular Classics edition, and the second one is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens in the Signet Classics edition. I have 2 books by one of my favorite authors, George Eliot. So I have Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. This is another long book and I'm a little bit intimidated by the length. I also have The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot on my shelf, which I need to read. Another of my favorite authors is Thomas Hardy, and I have 2 books by Thomas Hardy on my shelf. The first one is The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy, and the second one is Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy, another long book. I have 2 unread books by Henry James on my shelf. The first one is Washington Square by Henry James. This is such a beautiful edition. This is by Arcturus Publishers. The second one is The Ambassadors by Henry James. Now I want to talk about the books by some of the authors which are new to me. I have not read any of their books before. So the first one is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Then I have Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. I haven't read anything from Edith Wharton, so I have Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. Another new author to me is Solomon Northup, and I have 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. I also want to watch the movie after I read the book. Next is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is in the Penguin Classics edition. The Red Pony by John Steinbeck. The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. This is an Italian author. And this reminds me, I've never read anything by an Italian writer before. Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. Another long book. There is a movie based off this book on Netflix called Vanity Fair, starring Reese Witherspoon, which I'm excited about, but I want to read the book before I see the movie. Next is Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is in the World Cloud Classics edition. These editions are leather bound and such a treat to touch. Next is an epic poem, The Iliad by Homer, which is based on the Trojan Wars. Then I have Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. And the last book by an author which I have never read before is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Moving on to some authors which I have read from before. The first one is Oscar Wilde, and this is The Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays by Oscar Wilde. I have read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I was supposed to read this for October 2019, but I never got the chance. Then I have a book by Charlotte Bronte, which is Villette. I have read The Professor, I've read Jane Eyre, and I've also read Shirley, so I'm just left with Villette. This is in the Penguin English Library edition. Then I have The Cranford Chronicles by Elizabeth Gaskell. I loved reading North and South and Wives and Daughters. I have also read Mary Barton, so this is next book by Gaskell which I need to read. So I have read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I did not like it a lot, so I have another book which I want to try by him, and it is Tender is the Night. This is in the Penguin Popular Classics edition. And the last book on my Classics Community 2020 TBR is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I have read all the novels by Jane Austen. This is the only one which is left. I haven't tried any of her novellas yet. I really enjoy reading Jane Austen from Wordsworth Classics because they have illustrations for Jane Austen's books, like this one. So these are all the classics I wish to read this year. If you have read any of these books, let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I'm going to see you all in my next video very soon. Bye!